An election broadcast on behalf of the Labour Party.
Good evening. In all the reports in this campaign, we've concentrated on the future and what it can hold for us. But the future belongs, above all, to the young, and they have their own reasons for supporting Labour.
Millions of young people want Labour to win. People like Marjorie Fielding, who comes from Scotland and is learning to be a teacher, and Anthony Taylor, who swims for Nottingham. Newly married Pat Ledbetter, a typist from Surrey. A Yorkshire laundry worker, Betty Steer. And a young barrister, he comes from Manchester. Post office engineer, Alan Dyer. And 22-year-old Gwen Crabb, who's a secretary. Jim Daly, studying for his degree, and Brian Wilde, who works on a barge. All over Britain, young people are hoping Labour will win. Listen to some of their reasons.
In Scotland, where I come from, there are far too many young people unemployed. The Tories dismiss this as a small percentage, but the people.
What we need more than anything else in this country is a change in the attitude towards class. This isn't something about which I have a personal grudge, because I've managed to go to a university on the basis of scholarships, and my father's a factory labourer. But I do know that many of my friends who would have benefited from a similar education have been unable to do so because of the lack of university places.
I'm a lighterman. I work on the River Thames in London. Actually, I passed the 11 plus, but my father is a dock worker. Even if I had an enormous brain, which I haven't, he still couldn't have done anything for me where education was concerned. He needed me to go to work.
I would like to see much better sports facilities in Britain. Running tracks, other sports facilities, and in particular swimming pools.
Well, if the next government's going to help the young people of this country, like my husband and myself, they must reduce the mortgage interest rates and to enable us to buy our own homes.
I live in a fair-sized and rather dull provincial town. In the evening, from meeting place, my friends and I have the choice between 100 public houses and 2 coffee bars.
The place where I go is an old hall with cracked asbestos walls and a rusty gas stove in the kitchen. The older people seem satisfied, but it really isn't good enough for us younger generation.
I managed to pass my 11 plus, but only just. My friends who didn't pass looked on me as toffee-nosed because I went to a grammar school.
I'd like to see a major improvement in race relations in this country.
I believe that if we reduced our defence expenditure, in particular abolished nuclear weapons, we could then give some of that resultant saving to the underdeveloped countries.
Today, anyone with any spark of idealism is regarded as suspect. For example, if I go canvassing, people say, "What are you getting out of it?" I think this is a very sad reflection on the kind of society that we're living in.
Well, those are just some of the hopes and problems of young people which are leading them to support the Labour Party. And the party says that we should pay far more attention to them than we've done in the past. And what's more, we say that in particular, remembering what that last young man said, we must give practical encouragement to their desire for service and adventure.
Each of our campaign reports, we put a question to the Tories on your behalf. What about the answers to them? Woodrow?
We asked them 4 questions, and they've only answered 1, and they got that one wrong. They have said that they won't abolish the 11 plus examination. We asked them if they'd increase old age pensions by 10 shillings a week. Dead silence. We asked them to publish tables showing how much you pay and how much you get under each of the rival pension schemes. They daren't. We asked them to promise not to increase rents any further. They haven't answered that one because under their own Rent Act, a further 2 million houses are going to be decontrolled and their rents will go up. But still, they've got another 2 days to go. and if haven't answered our last three questions by then, you can draw your own conclusions.
Well, now, we've had in these reports a number of people each speaking up for himself and giving his reason for voting Labour. But there's one reason that hasn't been voiced yet, and tonight it comes from a man who speaks on behalf of millions.
I fear that if the Conservatives are returned to power in this election, there will be even more widespread unemployment. Now, I come from Tyneside, where there already is a serious unemployment problem. Only recently, the workers at a fairly large engineering factory have been informed that their factory is to close down. This follows the closing of a large railway workshop. The Conservatives don't seem to know about what to do about unemployment at all, and I feel that if they are returned to power in this election, there will be mass unemployment in this country.
As the campaign reaches its last few days, most of our leaders, of course, are in their constituencies, and we shall be going over to call on them briefly there. First to Wales, where Nye Bevan has just recovered from a bout of flu. Of course, we shan't be able to join him, but a few days ago, our film unit went out to ask him why he thought Labour would have a greater chance of success at the summit.
We had built up for some years a reputation for civilized conduct. The independence granted to India, to Pakistan, to Burma, to Ceylon, had shown that we were adjusted to the realities of the 20th century. And the conduct of the Tory government in 1956 in wantonly invading Egypt, deceiving the United States, and in violation of a charter of the United Nations, did us immense damage indeed, from which we have not yet recovered. The British Labour Party opposed this adventure, and therefore the country would be very much better if it were represented at the International Conference by a Labour government which would not be tainted with the poisons of the Suez adventure.
We're glad to see that Nye Bevan is back in action again. And now to Wales, where Jim Griffiths is waiting to join us.
Jim, you've been 40 years in the movement.
In the election campaign since 1910. And this is the best campaign yet. The spirit of 45 is back, and it's the best campaign we've got. The movement is in very good heart. We're on the road to victory. One last pull all together, and we're home. And then a Labour government. Have we got the men? Yes, we've got the men. In Hugh Gaitskell, our leader, we have a man of ability, integrity, and courage. A man of character. The kind of man Britain needs to lead it into this new age. And he has a team. We are a national party, and he can draw from every section of the community. Men and women of wide experience in local government, in business, in the professions. Yes, we've got a program to make Britain a better democracy and to help lead the world to peace. We've got the men and women to carry it out. Now for a victory and a Labour government on Thursday.
Now to the Midlands and to Birmingham and Richard Crossman. Dick, why do you think that pensions has been such a big issue in this campaign?
Well, we certainly have made them an important issue, and I think it's for two reasons. First, the facts on which we base our case for the pensioning increase are unchallengeable. There are great patches of poverty in this prosperous Britain, especially among the unemployed, the chronic sick, the widows, and of course the old people. Yet the Tories tell us that despite prosperity, we simply can't afford to give the 10 shillings. Who can believe that? Second reason is I think that we've always frankly told people that you can't get a good pension without paying for it, and we can't pay for it as a nation without increasing national prosperity. The Tories accuse us of offering an election bribe. The truth is exactly the opposite. We've spelt out to the British people what each of us has to pay if we're going to abolish poverty in old age. Have we overestimated the electorate? Well, we'll get the answer on Thursday.
Well, now we go back to Wales, this time for Jim Callaghan. Jim, if we win on Thursday, what's the first thing that needs doing in colonial affairs?
Well, our first job is clearly to restore the confidence of the African people in British fair play. And that's been pretty badly shaken over recent years by Conservative policies. You see, the trouble is the Tories simply don't recognise that their policies are setting every ardent young nationalistic African against Britain. On the other hand, they do know that a Labour government will recognise that they will have the right in due course to choose their own form of government. And that knowledge in itself will reduce tension out there and help us to get on an even keel. And so our first job will be to reduce tension so that we can release hundreds of Africans who are now held in jail for political reasons, and that's a pretty shameful thing in a British colony to be in jail for your political convictions, will enable us to release them, including Dr. Banda. You know, we must put an end to Nyasaland as a police state. We don't want another South Africa. What the Labour government will want is that Europeans and Africans shall live side by side in security and in peace.
North again to Manchester, where Harold Wilson is waiting in the studio. Harold, the Tories are still screaming, we can't afford it. What's your last word on that?
We shall pay for it by a planned and steady expansion of industry, especially those sections of industry that can contribute most to strengthening our economy and to building up our export trade. They say it can't be done. We reject this defeatist and anti-British Tory view that we've got to go on lagging behind the rest of Europe. And we're not very impressed by all these stories of prosperity that we hear so much about, a prosperity so brittle that it would go if we were to pay a decent old age pension or provide more for education and improving the nation's health. Now, a socialist chancellor would have three priorities: an economic priority to build up industry and strengthen the pound, a social priority to look after those who are in greatest need rather than those who are doing well already, and finally a taxation or a moral priority to see that those who really produce the nation's wealth would have to bear no more than a fair share of the burden.
Back once more, and for the last time, to the operations room in London, to Hugh Gaitskell. In September, the Labour leaders were in Moscow talking to Mr. Khrushchev. It's less than 4 weeks since Hugh Gaitskell returned to Britain. But he, more than any other leader of any political party, has dominated the whole campaign.
You know, the thing that's impressed me most about this election is that it's been fought on our programme, the Labour programme. What is this programme? Well, I'd sum it up in this way. It's partly a programme of social reform, and very urgently needed social reforms. You see, we feel that the 5 or 6 million men, women and children who are living today in some hardship and distress and at much lower living standards than the rest of us ought to be helped a little more. And we mean by these men and women and children old age pensioners, widows, people on sick benefit, disabled, and some others as well. And that's why we want to raise the pension and the insurance benefits by a shilling a week. And there's another group that we think needs help, and that is those who are living under squalid housing conditions, either because they're still in the slums or because they're living in a very overcrowded way. And the only way to do this is to build more council houses instead of fewer ones. We've got to build more hospitals as well, because we really must get rid of the scandal of the queue of 500,000 people who are sick and ill and can't get into a hospital because there aren't any beds. 2 other things, both about the future. We think the time has come when we ought to have in Britain a new kind of pension scheme, national superannuation, with pensions related to earnings, by and large half pay on retirement. It's not, as a matter of fact, very sensational. Several other countries in Western Europe already have this kind of thing, but it's the only way to achieve real security in old age. And then finally, the young. We've got to do a good deal more for them. We've got to invest a good deal more in education. And in particular, we've got to get rid of the system, the 11+ examination, which at present slams the door of opportunity in the face of most of our children. The other part of the programme is to develop our industries so that our wealth increases much faster than it has been recently. Now, there really oughtn't to be much disagreement about this. Mr. Butler said in 1954, for instance, that we could and should double our living standard in 25 years. And I agree with him. We certainly can do that. But we haven't been going at a rate anything like sufficient to do it in the last few years. Our production, which is the basis of everything, has been increasing far more slowly than that of almost any other industrial country. Now, two things about the expansion that we've got to have. First, we must have full employment, and by that I mean full employment everywhere, including Scotland, the northeast coast, Wales and Lancashire, and it can only be done by steering industry and coaxing industry into those parts where there's heavier unemployment. Yes, even by the use of controls. They're very necessary. And the other thing is that we believe in a mixed economy. There's room for public enterprise and private enterprise, some sections for one, some for the other. Both have got to flourish. We propose to extend the frontier of public enterprise somewhat because we want to be sure we can have enough steel for our expansion program and a properly coordinated transport system. Now, if we get the expansion and we get the growing wealth, as we should, and we all say we can, there's really no difficulty about finding the money. You can work it out if you like. The tax revenue increases automatically. And that's why I find it so difficult to understand why the Tories are making such a fuss, because I said we wouldn't increase income tax, and we might, in fact, indeed we would, take purchase tax off necessities. The fact of the matter is that we should be dealing far more with the problem of how the surplus is to be divided up. You may take the view, if you like, that it should all go back in tax concessions, all for ourselves, for our own immediate enjoyment. But that means saying nothing for the children, nothing for the less fortunate, nothing for those badly housed. And we in the Labour Party say no, that's not the right line, because the community has a prior obligation to these people, and we put them first. The tax concessions will come later. Now, that's why we call the Labour Party policy a good neighbour policy. It's a good neighbour policy not only at home, but abroad as well. For instance, we've always been against the international anarchy, and we've always fought for and worked for some system of international law and order. Now, it's very difficult, I know, to get it established. And meanwhile, we have to have our defences and we have to have our alliances. But there's one thing we can do, and that is, as a nation, pursue good neighbour policies to other people. Never use force except in self-defence. Always try and get our disputes settled peacefully. And whatever you may say about the Labour Party, we would never, never, never have committed the fiasco of Suez. It's much the same with our colonial policy. Jim Callaghan is absolutely right. If the difficult problems of Africa are to be solved, we've got to regain the confidence of the African people. And we can only do that, I'm absolutely convinced, if we understand and sympathize with their aspirations. And that means conceding them that they have the right to self-government just as we have. And it means, above all, recognizing that the time has long since passed when we can divide the world up into first and second-class citizens, some having the right to go there, others not, some having opportunities and others not, and all because of the colour of their skin. Well, that's our policy, and that's how we hope to achieve it. I think it's a fine, modern, new, realistic programme, exciting too. I don't pretend it's easy. It certainly needs confidence in our own future, confidence in Britain, but it's within our capacity to carry it out. And there's something else about it too. It seems to me to be in tune with the special qualities for which British people are admired all over the world, for kindliness, tolerance, decency, a sense of fair play. And those qualities will certainly be needed in carrying it out, both in our relations with each other and in our attitude to other people. I hope you're going to give us the chance to carry it out. Good night.
That was an election broadcast on behalf of the Labour Party.